Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining Unlimited Voices. I'm Del Jolly. I am the co-founder and director of Unlimited Sciences, a psychedelic research nonprofit. Today on Unlimited Voices, we're going to be speaking about psychedelics and how they've been perceived in the media. And we're joined with by some really fantastic folks today, some friends of mine who have been at this for quite some time, kind of talking about psychedelics and how they exist for reality for the rest of us. So our guest today is Ben Stewart. Ben is a musician, a film producer, and the host of Gaia.com's the Psychedelica series, which many of you are familiar with, and also Limitless. Ben is currently finishing a film on cannabis with Pete Evans and launching the Waking Infinity podcast to inform people about the unlimited human potential. Thank you so much for joining us, Ben. I appreciate you being here. Mareesa Stertz is joining us all the way from Costa Rica. She is a creative who has produced the documentary series, The Healing Powers, which is also on Gaia TV. She's an event curator at the Aware Project, which actually came up in our last podcast when we were talking about addiction, I believe, is where the Aware Project had come up in LA. And you also recently became the media director for Lucid News. Very interested to learn a little bit more about that. And then Cyndi Lundeberg is an Emmy award-winning journalist based in Las Vegas, Nevada. Throughout her journalist career, Cyndi has done multiple stories on psychedelics, including an in-depth piece on MDMA and as a cure for PTSD, and multiple stories highlighting the needs for cannabis for veterans. So thank you for your work in those efforts. If you guys are new to this platform, on the right, there's a stage where you could ask some questions, and we'll be getting around to those as we kind of flow through this webinar. And I wanted to mention, obviously, Unlimited Sciences is a nonprofit, and we have a Give Lively campaign that we'll be launching here very soon. But you could go to unlimitedsciences.org to learn more about who we are and what we're doing. And the first study that we're going to be launching here very soon is in collaboration with Johns Hopkins University. I've been working on this for a very long time. We're very excited to be much more public and get in the media with what we're up to, but it takes some time to do this and do it correctly. But if you feel called to support us, please go to our Give Lively and help with our efforts to try to do this community outreach and community science. So, but again, thank you guys so much for being here. Super excited to have you here. And I'm going to just start with a question that I think is kind of interesting for the way that media portrays psychedelics. But I'd like to just ask each of you real quickly, what is the wildest thing that you've ever heard in the media about psychedelics? You know, there's always the story that you hear about the person who did LSD and they turned into a glass of orange juice and they couldn't tip over because they're in an insane asylum. I don't know if you've heard that one. That was the one I listened to when I was younger. But Mareesa, how about you? What is one of the more wild things that you've heard in mainstream media about psychedelics?
There's the biggest one is that you will use brain, the old anti-drug campaign commercials where this is your brain on drugs, right there, is a huge one. I, as a kid, was so into it. I was actually in a Nancy Reagan parade wearing a Just Say No t-shirt. I had that green t-shirt with the white logo. I was such a part of that whole thing. I was also like 9,
nice. I love it. That's Nancy Reagan put it out there pretty good. And I'd love to have somebody find the picture of you in that green shirt, because we need to be floating that around. That's an important piece of media. Ben, how about you? What's something very wild and unique that you've heard about psychedelics in the media that was just plain wrong? Oh, we're having some audio issues. It seems like seems like you're off mute. Maybe our moderator Lisa could look into that. Cyndi, you think that you can come on that question and see what's
Yeah, so I
what
don't
do you
know
what have
about,
you heard?
yeah, I don't know what's the most insane thing that I've heard, because I feel like we could spend the entire podcast talking about that. But one thing that I definitely do think is a common theme, especially when it comes to psychedelics and the media, is it's just like psychedelics crime, you know? So one thing that like is coming to my mind is a story I did about a guy who said he did mushrooms and then he killed his girlfriend, you know? So that kind of like link of psychedelics crime, right? So and I remember when I was doing that story, like thinking like maybe like this person had pre-existing clearly mental health issues. It wasn't just, oh, he did mushrooms and then became a murderer. But that's kind of like, I feel like sometimes the template, it's like crime, psychedelics, crime, drugs, right?
Yeah, that's interesting. You say that. When I was on the Decrim Denver team, there was the discussion of, how are people going to say, well, people are going to run out into the streets and do wild and crazy things. And the conversation was, well, those wild and crazy things are already illegal. So you can drink alcohol legally and be responsible not to do the other things that are illegal, just like you could potentially use psychedelics in a fashion that are, if we could get there in a legal manner and not do the other illegal things like crime.
But that's not as exciting for news, right? So there's like a saying in news, it's like, if it bleeds, it leads. That's a saying around multiple newsrooms that I've been in. And so the idea that if it's like crime or it scares people, that will do better for ratings and getting viewers to tune in. So like, for example, right now with the COVID crisis, people are terrified. So if you're looking at TV ratings, they've spiked recently because people are scared. So if you can kind of keep people a little bit wary of things, they're more likely to kind of tune in to find out more information, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Ben, you want to test the audio again? Hopefully we could pull you in. Oh man, it's still no good. You have to write down and sign it up. These are all these memes that you get when you have COVID and all these Zoom conferences, the errors. We'll have to have this, but maybe we could try to figure out what that is. I'm not sure. Sorry, Ben. Yeah, Cyndi, you kind of, your work with media is more mainstream. 5 News, Las Vegas. How does that differ? And what were they kind of asking you when you had a story that you were doing? What was the reception from your team?
If I was pitching a story or if I had an idea I wanted to do, kind of, is that what you're asking?
Yeah, either or. If you had an idea, I know that you and I talked offline about some really interesting stories that I feel would capture attention, but you just couldn't get anywhere with them. Tell us about that.
Yeah. So when we had talked, I had pitched a story. There was multiple stories that I pitched that they were like, no way. But one of my favorites was, I had been talking to UFC fighters and different people who were telling me that they were doing psilocybin microdosing between their fights. And they were under the impression that it not only made them better fighters, it helped with muscle recovery. And these are things that I had never heard of when if you think about psilocybin, and maybe you guys know that, but like when I heard that, I was like mind blown. So I had pitched that idea, like this would do so well. People would watch this. This is fascinating. But when I would pitch those stories, the kind of feedback I would get from my bosses is, it's illegal. We might be encouraging someone to do something that's illegal. And also, I think that they were concerned of possible ramifications of if someone did watch my story and then went and, tried mushrooms for the first time, what could kind of happen. But again, I think the idea that I would be encouraging someone to do something illegal or showing the benefits of something illegal was a lot of the feedback I got.
Yeah, that's interesting. Mareesa, how about you with some of the things that you do in the healing powers, a lot of very varying stories. Is it your approach to with news outlets? How is that different from some, other mainstream media? And why do you think that that's an important outlet compared to others?
I want to echo, like I've had similar experiences as Cyndi's where, I'd been making documentaries, and 6 years ago in my own journey work, I was like, oh my God, the world needs to know. And I started like sniffing around and seeing if I could connect with producers to find people who'd want to work on this with me. And everybody just blanket response of like, there's no way, nobody will touch this because there's too much risk and people don't want to encourage drug use, and still so many people were operating under that conception that all drugs are bad. And Gaia is incredible for creating a platform, but I had actually created the Healing Powers with Mary Jane, Snoop Dogg's media company, mostly focused on cannabis, but, they also saw that psychedelics was the next frontier. So they helped, they funded the project, and then Gaia TV picked it up. It's really exciting with Gaia TV because the audience is much more geared towards the sort of consciousness expansion ideology. With Snoop Dogg's, it was a little bit of using cannabis to get high, not necessarily to open up and do the inner soul searching that psychedelics so encourage us to do.
Understood. Ben, can we try you again?
Am I here?
Oh, you're here. Wonderful. So exciting.
I had it all ready. I was going to write it out. And then I was like, don't write it. Don't write it. That'll curse it. It was Chrome. I was on Safari. Yeah, it was that whole thing.
Oh, gotcha. Well, welcome, Ben. Thank you so much. And you've kind of been Psychedelica. If, you start following enough accounts on Facebook, Psychedelica always tends to pop up and from, Gaia marketing it. And I'm like, oh man, Ben created that. And it was 2017, which, they kind of do cannabis and dog years, and Psychedelica is like that too. If you've been doing this for 1 year, you've been in this forever, where did you get the idea for that? And how did that go? I mean, again, three years ago, that's kind of a long time ago for this.
Yeah, for sure. So, I've been into plant medicines for quite some time, and especially more ancestral uses, and really understanding like how did they understand the plant kingdom that much. So I've been at it for a while. As far as making the Psychedelica series, it started with I got an opportunity to work there as a producer. So I went in I think it was the third day I was there. I was still acclimating, and the CEO came up and we had a conversation about ayahuasca and a few of the other plant medicines that I had tried around the world. And he said, would you like to make a show on psychedelics? And I said, yeah, I'm your man. Psychedelics and shamanism was the focus. And so I began developing the idea, and we landed on the name Psychedelica, which was a song I wrote when I was really, really young. And yeah, that stuck. The branding came together really quickly. That entire season came together in about 6-7 months. It was incredible. And I usually don't have 95% of people saying yes to interviews, especially when I'm going for the caliber of people that I got. And everyone said yes. I think that's a testament to Gaia, and I think it's also a testament to the times we're in.
Yeah, absolutely. Have you seen kind of a resurgence in that popularity of that particular piece? And if so, when did that start?
Honestly, since I created it and we launched it on Gaia, that was about, at first it was just the Gaia audience that was watching. And that's roughly 500,000, maybe more by now, roughly 500,000 people. So we got a really good response on Gaia. We got a nominal response outside of Gaia to come in and watch it. And I would say since that time, it's been steadily increasing. And I think that's less probably to do with my promotion of it and more to do with Gaia's method of promoting is really a lot more widespread, and they can put a lot more dollars behind it. So it's probably been growing in that respect, but also, thanks to LinkedIn and several other kinds of sites, I've been getting people left and right that I wouldn't have realized. People in higher places in industry contacting me asking about future projects because of Psychedelica, which was wild to me because, I'm not really in that kind of an industry. I'm more of an artist just trying to say my piece. So it's really interesting that plant medicines and psychedelics have become this popular, that I'm getting people in giant investment firms connecting with me about building projects.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I don't want to steal your thunder, but do you want to tell the crowd about your next project that you're working on?
Man, I have a couple in the works. Right now, I'm about finished with this film called The Magic Plants with Chef Pete Evans out of Australia. And it's on hemp and cannabis. And, it was interesting. I wasn't about to say yes to the project just because of the topic. I felt it had been played out a little too much. But then I realized as I was looking through a lot of the content, that a lot of the content that makes it to larger SVOD platforms, and that's subscription video on demand, that they weren't touching it in a respect that I wanted to touch it and that Pete wanted to touch it, which was far more from a consciousness expansion, meditative, sustainability, healing trauma, and also just getting up to date with where the science is and where the old science and propaganda lies right now. And so I think what's really nice about it is there's very little finger pointing in it. It's really about showing where is cannabis and hemp headed if it follows the same trajectory in big industry that a lot of the big agricultural soy, beans, corn, barley, rice, things like that, biodiversity shrinks, something else happens to it after industry gets a hold of it. So that's kind of the focus on the film. And we're just trying to bring to light some of the room for improvement and potential that the industry has. And then I have three other projects, one of them called DMT Quest, which is about endogenous DMT, how we produce DMT already all the time in our bodies, more and more proven as of 2019 in higher amounts than we ever thought. And it has more to do with our perception of reality than we ever thought as well. So those are a couple projects.
Interesting. Very cool. And yeah, Chef Pete Evans is someone, when you talk about media and the way that media portrays people, if people aren't familiar with Pete Evans, he's in Australia. In what I understand is that he's portrayed very poorly in the media because he was talking about keto diet, or what did he introduce that really got him on the map?
Well, when he started basically challenging the food pyramid, the government standard Australian food pyramid, he basically said, I think most of this stuff can go and we need to start looking the way our ancestors ate. So he talked about keto, he talked about paleo. And the strange thing is that he's not even getting bashed as much by vegan activists, if you will, as much as by GQ and a lot of the higher media companies out there, which are very strange. And, to be perfectly, I can't be perfectly biased because I know Pete, but when I look at the things that are written about him, none of them are something that a full-grown adult would say about another full-grown adult. And these are reputable sources they're coming from. So what's great about it is who's the she was from Greece, and then she ended up getting cancer. She's Australian. She was the main woman in Greece. Do you guys know her name?
No,
I forget.
Sorry, I don't.
So, but anyway, they were saying she's such a big celebrity, but nobody can really match Pete Evans' online and social status, influencer status. And so I think they're also very afraid of somebody who speaks from the heart. That's my personal opinion.
Olivia Newton-John is what our listeners are.
That's who it was. Yeah. And they said that, even her social media following can't really do anything, close to what Pete Evans has out there in the form of influence. So I think he's a very genuine man. I can say that we all have our flaws, but he has far fewer than I would have even expected, having read the stuff I read about him before meeting him.
Yeah, he seems like a very good human being. I like what I see from him. Mareesa, tell us a little bit about your newest project, Lucid News. This seems very interesting, and I'd like to know what that is.
Well, so I've been going to a lot of psychedelic conferences, and we, as it goes, at one point you couldn't keep track anymore to all the new businesses and all the new patents that were being explored and everything that was emerging. It was really hard to keep track of. And I organized a psychedelic leadership summit, which is, we had one of your guys come to that, right, Del? Somebody from Unlimited Sciences.
Albritton.
Right.
Albritton did.
Right. And so actually at that event, right before Horizons, I met Ken Jordan, who was one of the founders of Reality Sandwich, Evolver, Alchemist Kitchen in New York City. And the two of us got along, and we went out with a bunch of friends for dinner, and the two of us started talking. We're like, my God, there's so much happening. How do we keep track of it? And him with his journalist background and me with my video background, we're like, maybe we should do something. And so we cooked up this thing called Lucid News, and really the effort being to distinguish the difference between journalists and between opinion pieces, to help keep track of all these new businesses emerging in the space, and really sort of create a bridge for these newcomers into the space, because as we all know, psychedelics is such a, it's gotten to where it is because a lot of people have worked and are deeply invested in it. It is such a delicate tool in our tools of biohacking and consciousness expansion. And if they are not wielded with the right intention and with the right grounding, so much mayhem can happen. So many bad things can happen. And so really to help educate newcomers in this space on all of what has been done before they got here, and help connect those dots from the community to them. That's, these are some of the things where really we saw space that needed to be filled, and we raised some funds. Annie Oak came on our team. We have a couple of other writers and editors that came from Reality Sandwich. And what's so nice is it sort of just came together seamlessly, and we're really, really excited.
Very cool. Very cool. Excited to see what kind of content comes out of that. Cyndi, is being kind of more of a mainstream person in Fox News 5. That's, your 5 o'clock news. Where do you think the future of media will be when it comes to portraying psychedelics? Do you think that they'll go more the scientific breakthrough route, or demonizing stories? I mean, like you kind of mentioned, if it bleeds, it leads. What are your thoughts on what mainstream media like Fox News 5 will do, or various channels of that nature?
So I do want to clarify, I work for Fox 5, but it is not owned by Fox News, just a precursor there.
Okay, sure. Sorry. Bad media.
Fox,
this is how rumors get started.
Well, and like Fox News is so polarizing. So I do like local news, right? So the way that I think that, psychedelics will likely be portrayed, or if it is in the media, it'll probably be something along the lines, or very similar to what marijuana, like it'll be like studies, it'll probably go medical first, right? And then we would cover that. And then also like if any laws are passing, right? So that's kind of how I see it progressing, because like now, like back in the day, like when I first started, like marijuana was the same. It would be like, oh, there's a huge drug bust here, or this person was caught with this, felony trafficking or whatever, and now it's like, I have the ability to do stories on things like Puff, Pass, and Paint, which is a place you go, get high and then you paint, which was so much fun to cover. But I would have never been able to cover that like in my first few years of my career, because marijuana was so kind of like taboo, kind of like psychedelics are now. So I feel like if psychedelics are covered, it'll be kind of in the same way that I have been able to cover them. Like I did a story on MAPS and their study on MDMA for PTSD. So like I was allowed to do that because it was like scientific, or, I remember we had that Denver decriminalized psilocybin. So like that is okay, because it's not necessarily like us portraying something illegal as okay, if that kind of makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. What do you think the future stories will look like as far as microdosing? I think that that's probably going to be something that you'll see. One of our good friends, Samina, just said that she saw an article in Town and Country. You know, you have all these kind of mainstream starting to edge into microdosing. Do you think that that's the entry, or how do you think how it affects humans on a low dose will start to change?
Unfortunately, I think if more states and cities decriminalize psilocybin, I think we'll have more flexibility to do those like fun stories like this, you know, like I kind of pitched, like these fighters are using psilocybin to help. But until then, I think that the media and the news is going to like that fine line of, if it's illegal, we're not going to encourage people to do it. If that, you get what I'm, that's their biggest concern. And I feel like a lot of people in the media and in the news, like they're not necessarily the people that are, and there's exceptions, of course, but maybe not necessarily the people that are super familiar with psychedelics and know the benefits. And so they are on that kind of train of like, you know, it's bad, it's illegal, kind of like drug busts.
Sure. Mareesa, how about for you, for something like Lucid News, which is obviously an organization that is, I'd assume, leaning pro psychedelic. What about the bad stories? What will your organization do to talk about some of the difficult experiences that people have, or the red flags that are undoubtedly out there?
I think it's really essential for a successful integration of psychedelics into mainstream world is that everything be shared with full transparency, 100%, and just clear reporting, you know. And I mean, if there's an opinion, then again, we'll share that in an opinion piece distinguished in the opinion section of our site. But I think all information needs to be disclosed with complete transparency.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're kind of seeing that with, you know, COVID-19, when you think about media and its role and its ability to shape opinions, whether it's right or wrong. It's a very, very important part of any way that people gather information. But I do believe that these kind of alternative news sites, or, you know, not mainstream, tend to start becoming more popular because people are just trying to get information that they feel is good and safe, you know. So
I mean, you know, I have to also give the disclaimer that, yeah, like I've been working with psychedelics for many, many years now, and what I have seen is that stories only go south when there's a certain series of circumstances where there was a lack of preparation, a facilitator who didn't know what they were doing, the location wasn't good, or the person had pre-existing conditions. There's usually a set of circumstances that contributes to this. So, you know, it's best to highlight what leads to disaster so we can help steer others into the right directions, to better practices. So, you know, with that, there's nothing to be afraid of or to be ashamed of or to try to hide, because I think all my own experiences, and I've actually also spoken to a lot of people running panels who've dedicated more like multiple decades to facilitating these medicines. And I've asked, hey, do people go south with psychedelics? Like, have you ever seen anyone lose their mind in a way where you couldn't figure out why that happened? Like, just totally random, a super healthy, awesome person who had their life together, everything was perfect, and they cracked, you know, and they were like, you can, I mean, of course, there's no 100%, but I'd say 95%. Everybody was just like, I can tell you definitively it was because X, Y, or Z.
If I could jump in really quick. Sorry, Del. Yeah. I wanted to comment on what Mareesa said. And you asked this question in the beginning, you know, like, what is a crazy thing you've heard? I completely agree with what she was saying, is like there's some sort of an idea, I think, out there that like if you do psychedelics that you'll lose your mind, or you might have like lasting mental health issues or something like that. So that is definitely something I do hear, and I think is kind of a reoccurring theme with coverage, is that you know, someone did psychedelics and they developed this, or they went schizophrenic or had a psychotic break kind of thing. So that's definitely something I hear and I've like read when I've anchored before, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think we all have. I mean, it is a reality. You know, I think that as this space emerges, there's so much excitement around it that people are very quick to suggest, you know, even microdosing or macrodosing or this or that. And it's something that takes a lot more preparation, like Mareesa says, and make sure that you're very ready for it. It's not for everybody, you know, so it's kind of, it could be scary because we want to be excited. We want to get good information out. It seems to have so much potential, but how are we conveying that? And is someone just going to try this and then have a bad episode? So, Ben, tell us a little bit about your show, Limitless. When we talk about new information that's being put out in the media, what's Limitless look like, and why are you doing this show?
Well, Limitless is it's really my baby. I started out 12 years ago making films, and it was kind of more of a, you know, strangely an empowering conspiratorial style of films. And then it just kept moving into that empowering bit, whereas where is human potential? Like what does that even mean? Do we have a grasp on that? And I play the topic of psychedelics in there in several ways, because when I'm talking about potentially unexplainable phenomena, unexplainable now, such as telepathy, remote viewing, telekinesis, these things like that. There are starting to be connections where people are saying this might be even like a DMT dump in the cerebral spinal fluid. There might be some kind of connection between blurring the inner world and the outer world there. So I kind of covered a little bit of that, but really there was just a little bit more science that I didn't even put into Psychedelica, such as some theories where the microtubules in your neurons go into coherence patterns that correlate with quantum phenomena when on psychedelics. So these things were just kind of blowing my mind. So the whole thing is really about what is our highest human potential. And when I throw in psychedelics, how can that help? I think it really is, you know, Mareesa was just talking about the things that can make an experience go south. I think we don't put the right language around it. So we just expect, well, I can eat, you know, a sandwich here, or I can eat a pile of psilocybin mushrooms over here, and I have this crazy experience. I must be poisoning myself, and all these very quick ideas we could throw into it. But I think what's happening on psychedelics is we are rapidly awakening to a spectrum of reality we very rarely see, because we're almost always in default mode, doing our thing, our daily routines. So when I say highest human potential, I think that has to mean that we have to look at reality in new ways, in higher order ways, in more complex ways. And I think the end of the whole series is pretty much just talking about the big picture. Like, what's the higher human potential of a human is the higher human potential of all humanity. And that's when we get into how sustainable are human beings on this earth. Is it all human beings, or is it, you know, a select few? Is it corporations? Do we just not know how to keep ourselves healthy and alive? Do we not know how to not go extinct? And that's really the topics that I'm covering in there is what is our higher potential as a species, and how do we cultivate that? And strangely enough, I've only found real amazing examples inside ayahuasca ceremonies and other plant medicine ceremonies of how the group holds the space. And if you get a really good group, you can do some real healing. You can really overcome a lot. You can step into your power more. And it's not just because of the medicine and just because of the shaman or whoever's making music. It's the entire group. It's their intentions. It's how they learn to listen and allow you to go through your process, rather than, are you okay? Are you okay? It's an evolved way of being. And I think that's what we need to step into as a species.
Yeah, that's a very good points. Thank you, Ben. Getting back to like the idea around media and going back to the amount of news that we're consuming right now via the COVID, let's talk about facts versus fake news. And you have scientific studies, let's say specifically to COVID, and you're talking about, you know, how is this virus affecting people? How are These are the scientific facts. We've done studies, but the media can take that and do whatever they want with it and convey a message that they need to, whether it's, oh, COVID is fake or COVID's very, very, very serious. How do you discern as a consumer when you get fed information by someone who you think you should be able to trust? How do you guys kind of know like what's new or what's real and what's not? And, I always like the idea when you're making an argument, well, you could always just reference www.I'm right, you're wrong. And I'll find any stat I need to support my message. How in media do they do that? And how do you know what to believe anymore? Mareesa, maybe you have an idea on that?
Interesting question. So my father's a Trump supporter, and there was a stretch where he was always, and Cyndi, I understand you're not affiliated to regular Fox News, but he would send me and try to have me watch clips. And what I always found was whenever somebody is giving me news and they're super emotional and fired up and their emotions are driving the information and like that to me feels like you are using your emotions to persuade me to have an opinion. You want me to feel the way you feel, fired up and whatever it is. And that distorts what I think is the truth. When I read news, if I can hear the clear facts without opinion, that's how I discern personally truth from fiction. I mean, clearly we don't know unless we've done it firsthand in all kinds of things. Sometimes I have to say, I'm not a flat earther, but sometimes you're like, how do we know? We've never been there. Like if you've been there personally and you can somehow verify, great, but we just don't know. So I kind of have taken that after working with psychedelics and said, I don't know a lot of stuff, but I know what I personally see. And I also, I know what I resonate with, but information, dry facts.
Yeah, absolutely. Cyndi, how about you? How do you discern what's real and what's fake?
So, so especially not so much local news, but you have to think like national news, which has millions and millions of viewers. They are kind of beholden to who advertises with them, right? So like, for example, I can talk like locally. I don't know about like CNN and Fox and whatnot per se, but like, I worked for a station once that was sponsored by, it was like Chevy, the local Chevy dealership, right? One of like the Chevys exploded while mom was driving it, and my general manager for my station quickly nixed that story, right? Because if we piss them off, guess what? They're not gonna do ads with us again, right? So that's why I think it's really, really important for people to diversify what they watch and where they go, right? So I believe that a lot of the answers are really out there. We just have to be uncomfortable or go to places that maybe we wouldn't normally go to get those answers, right? So if you're always watching Fox News, like this is what you're seeing. If you're always watching MSNBC, it's this, So I would encourage people to read and look up things like that they normally don't. And then I think that can also help us understand each other better because we are getting kind of different perspectives. But the information is out there, I believe. You just need to kind of look for it.
Sure. Let me ask you this then, Cyndi. What is in your news feed? What are you listening to? I mean, if on the daily you open your phone or computer, where are you getting your information?
I follow, as you can imagine, a lot of news sites. So I do have CNN. I like Huffington Post and New York Times. Just kind of depends on what I'm interested in, or if I love the Joe Rogan Experience. And so sometimes he'll just like talk about things and I'm like, wait, I need to Google that real quick, right? So I really do try and diversify what I watch and listen to, just because even like CNN, I used to feel like was down the center. And lately, like with COVID and stuff, I've noticed like really just how far left they are. So I do like CBS News. I really do feel is kind of down the middle. AP, Reuters, those are, they're not as like sexy to watch and listen to because it really just is the facts. And so like kind of like what Mareesa was saying, if something is like really, or someone's like super passionate about something, it's sometimes like agenda driven, right? So like AP, Reuters, they're very dry, but I do think that they provide the facts without the kind of like sexy fluffing of the news stories, if that makes sense.
Sure. Yeah, I know I'm very passionate about psychedelics, and I come off very harsh, so I'm probably not a very good news source for anybody. But Ben, how about you? What's your news feed look like? Where are you finding, if you're trying to discern a story or consume anything at all via information, what is that?
Yeah, well, I tend to lately, and this is a growing discipline, but Claire Graves, back in the early 1900s, a psychologist, had this thing called spiral dynamics. And it's just the idea that we start as a species or a human at one level of consciousness, and we expand, contract, but in a sense, rise up the ladder. And what information looks like up here is different down here. Down here, we have sources that we trust and don't trust. Up here, trust is almost what Mareesa was saying, what you resonate with. And it's also what you can measure and put into action. So there's also this kind of disconnect between the way information drives our actions and also acting as if you don't know completely, and you also want to test and challenge your own assumptions. So for me, when I look through my feed, I look at Fox, CNN, MSNBC, Russia Today, conspiracy websites, independent bloggers, anything I can find. I go to the top of the Google searches, the very bottom of the Google searches. I go to books that might have said something about it. I find keywords that stand out, even if it's a total tangent, and I'll go off into that tangent for a little while and come back. And what I think it's doing is it's kind of like in this vast ocean of darkness, we usually have like a flashlight looking at what we want to see, what we desire to understand. Like we have a question and we want closure, so we hold a flashlight on it. But if you could hold like 15 or 20 flashlights, these are all those tangents, and it starts to kind of fill in a little bit more context. And so for me, the way I take in information and discern fact from fiction is less about the outside world, and it's more about, can it meet these two criteria? Does it come from love, and does it benefit all people without disadvantaging unnecessarily? And if it can, then that'll be what informs my actions. But I try not to say I know anything, not a thing. I barely know who I am. That's a question I meditate on every single night. So.
Yeah, it's good. People are humble. That's who you should listen to, maybe. And that's one of my favorite quotes that was in Tools for Titans. I don't recall who said it, but it was to have strong convictions loosely held. The idea, like I'm passionate about this. I really adhere to the message here. But until I get some new information that is gonna sway that, okay, I could let go of that. So. Mareesa, how about you? Your news feed, where are you getting information? What does that look like? What are some channels that you tap into to inform yourself?
Well, I mean, for psychedelic news, it's Trip Sitter Report is a really nice source. Times, a lot of it is, and I'm focusing so much on right now mining the connections that I've been developing over the last couple of years. So, I have a friend, Aaron Orsini, who's been using psychedelics, LSD, to treat his own autism, and following his work as he's developing that further and further. And, I've been organizing events. And so finding out what people one-on-one are doing, because there's, right now with psychedelics, there's not a primary news source that is generating this to follow up on it. Once in a while you get an article by, what did we just say? Town and Country, so you're finding things on these random sources. But for us, we're like in the conferences, meeting people and interacting one-on-one, and, kind of word of the grapevine. There's a few mailing lists and things out there too.
Yeah, and that's so the study that we're doing with Johns Hopkins is kind of trying to find that information out, as far as you have a substance like psilocybin, and it's being used by hundreds of thousands of people, whether it's legal or illegal, and the information that is coming from that, not to collect that and understand, is kind of a crime, because it's citizen science. And when it comes to things like psychedelics that are you're not allowed to research. You're not allowed to have that scientific data to back it in the depth that you do other substances. It's hard to discern what's true. And this is definitely a citizen-led movement. And that's what our study hopes to capture when we launch this. And I'll get to on the Joe Rogan show. Our friend Rashad Evans was on Joe Rogan, and he was talking about his career and using psilocybin. And we got hundreds of emails from people telling us their stories, and that data, that information is so important, and that information can help research and media know, where people are using this. One of the more interesting subjects emails that we received was a gentleman saying that he used using psilocybin for facial tics, like Tourette's syndrome, and I'd never heard that. That is the type of citizen science that we want to understand to then help inform clinical research. So the news that's coming out into the world tends to be led by those who are doing these things and taking action, especially on the health end. Hey, what are you using psilocybin for? And people are starting to talk about that, and that's good information. And so going back to kind of like alternative sources, I think that's why Joe Rogan in particular has such a huge following, because people are just sick and tired of the same talking heads, and you don't know what their agenda is, like you say, Cyndi, to who's the advertiser, and Joe doesn't care. And I think that's why that's received really well, and things like Gaia are so well received as well. So we have some questions on the right. If you guys have some questions that you want to ask about media in particular, ask them on the right, and we will get around to answering those. But let's get back into mainstream media and trying to understand, I don't know, what's a topic that psychedelics, what's the breakthrough story that will put this into the mainstream media? And I personally believe that it's maybe veterans. I think a veteran story and psychedelics is going to be the one that's going to break into, the carpenter in Michigan who relates with that person and sees it. What do you guys think is maybe the mainstream media that people will start turning their heads and say, okay, look, this is not just some hippie movement. There's something to it. Cyndi?
Yeah, so don't think it's going to be one story that just like shatters this thing. I think it's going to be like constant little chips, right? That people are like, oh, psychedelics can be used for this, and they can be used for this, and just more of a growing kind of awareness for people that aren't in the psychedelic field. You mentioned the, veterans and PTSD and MDMA, and someone had commented on the side there, and I said, oh, I did a story about veterans and MDMA, and that, cannabis for veterans suffering from PTSD, it's just gut wrenching and heartbreaking. And cannabis does provide, so this is like I'm just kind of reiterating their words, but cannabis provides some help for them. They can sleep at night. They can, get off some of those like very heavy narcotics that they're on. But MDMA, with the right therapy and, some of the studies that MAPS is doing has actually been shown to cure PTSD, right? So I love that story. I think it's so important, but I don't think it's going to be one story that it's just like, oh yeah, now everyone's fine with psychedelics. I think it's just going to be like constant, information out there, and, this person is using it. And like one thing that it's just like more about getting the general mainstream information out there. One thing that MAPS does is they, I think it's like once a year they do, and sorry if you guys, you're like, I know this, but MAPS encourages people to do psychedelics because, and then they retweet some of the things that people say, like, oh, it's helped me with this, and it brings me closer to my family, or, and so I remember, like, I think it was like last year, I just was like emotional reading some of these things. And I was like, that is beautiful and amazing, and things that we don't always hear about when it comes to psychedelics. So again, I think it's that idea of just like more information, more things like Lucid News, just getting that information out there kind of.
Yeah, just to be crystal clear, Unlimited Voices is trying to create a very approachable platform for people to ask any questions they want. This is not designed for people who know everything about psychedelics. Obviously, a lot of folks here know a ton about it, but do not feel ashamed to ask any question at all, because this is a place to do it. We want to make sure that you feel comfortable doing that. Our great friend, Deborah Servtanek. Hi, Deb. Good to see you. Had mentioned a really cool story that was on the Today Show with parents talking about how make them better parents. How about that angle? Ben, what do you think about an angle like that? You're a father. Do you think that that's maybe a Trojan horse to talk about how psychedelics benefit people and their families?
There was Isla Waldeman. She wrote, I hope I can remember, a very good day or something like that.
Yeah.
And she was a mom that was dealing with depression and anxiety and several things, and started microdosing. And she wrote about it and made a big splash on the parenting side of it. I can say that, as a parent who was doing plant medicines beforehand, actually even during the pregnancy myself, and then afterwards, seeing that actually helped me understand, or I guess accept, the miracle of what a child even is. Like, we create this thing, and it's so mundane that sometimes we're just like, oh yeah, you just had a baby. And it's just like, no one can explain that, And I think there's something about the plant medicines that really helped me understand that parenthood is a, for lack of a better way of saying it, is a very divine role and a duty. And you really are, you're starting children out on a path. So as far as like, will that be the story that gets people? I know a lot of people that, don't have kids and probably wouldn't understand that. So I kind of I agree that this is going to take several stories, but usually if you get the veterans, the parents, the like cannabis, when it came to little children that have epilepsy, and something as simple as just CBD isolate can make the world of difference, between next to 1,000 seizures down to 15 seizures in a day. Some of these stories are incredible. So I think I would really like to see more media on how incredible the plant kingdom really is, that we have things like cannabis and ayahuasca and these combinations, and they do slightly different things. You hear that iboga is really good also for healing, like early in your own life family trauma, but for spiritual people, also seeing ancestors, or spirits. And then every single one of these plants, there's some crossover, but they're also very individual on their own. And each one of them, like another with ibogaine, is opioid addiction. It's really incredible for that. And so there's this family tree of these mind-bending compounds. And I think what I'm seeing more right now is a big trend in, should DARPA be, taking the hallucinatory vibe out of psychedelics? Like, will psychedelics work if it doesn't impact the mind in the classical psychedelic way? And I think there's more stories on that coming up. So I feel like people might be, maybe this is just my hope and my bias, coming out of this very Puritan feeling of like, anything that alters your consciousness is bad and it's wrong and you shouldn't feel good about it. I feel like when you just start waking up to life, you start realizing that reality wasn't what you thought it was 10 years ago. So I kind of feel that there's going to be more and more stories that have to do with the mind-bending qualities of it, and potentially dovetailing somewhere in the very near future with artificial intelligence, simulated reality, information-based reality, like heady topics. But I think that the people are becoming more and more primed to start asking these types of questions. And I feel, somebody mentioned in the comments here, I noticed that propaganda hasn't been very prevalent in the media on psychedelics specifically. And I mentioned in there that I've noticed that, and I've only been able to say that maybe it's because there's a lot of money dumping into psychedelic research now. And it's also, it's old fashioned. I think people see through like just blatant propaganda anymore without hardcore science, especially because of social media is showing us. There's a lot of people saying these are on water as well. Let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Yeah, and I think that that's the absolute truth with cannabis. They really messed up that marketing campaign there, because that was proven to be false, and now it's really difficult to trust them on anything. You know, I mean,
I just want to say Joe Rogan made this one comment. I think it was on a History Channel thing about cannabis, where he basically just said, so it's the gateway drug to a drug that's less dangerous, like cocaine, because cocaine was in a less strict category than marijuana. So, and they're calling it the gateway drug to a less, dangerous drug. So that's really what people are waking up to as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And you touch base on cannabis in children with epilepsy, and that's absolutely what has brought me here, being of a conservative background and totally against marijuana a few years ago. That media piece that I saw helped change my mind to realize like I was in the dark. And that's very close to our organization with Heather Jackson, our co-founder, who's started the Realm of Caring and Charlotte's Web, and that whole journey has helped a lot of people like myself convert. Mareesa, real quickly, we only have a couple minutes left. What is the news story that's going to break? Is it going to be parents, or is it going to be veterans, or how do you think mainstream will kind of come to this? Oh, I don't, you're on mute, Mareesa, sorry.
I'm curious what will bring, we're like on restriction right now. The world's on restriction, forced to stay home and think about what we've done. I mean, a lot of people I know are going, we're not happy with the way things were. We don't want things to go back to normal. And I know I'm on the fringe. I'm sure there's plenty of people that are like, we do want things to go back to normal. But, there's the question of what systems can we create that actually serve us and can create a world that's sustainable, that is functional and actually stewards people's mental health. So my hope, in addition to everything that Cyndi and, oh my God, I just